We live in an interesting time, as the internet has allowed more people to express their views of certain movies. However, while before most people talked about the technical aspects and performances they liked, I'm noticing more and more that the politics of a movie, any movie, can become the forefront of a film's discussion. And there's nothing wrong with that, as when you get down to it, every movie is political. They're not the products of apolitical minds, as a lot of them are the result of the filmmakers implementing a lot of their own ideologies into the work. The current landscape has resulted in two extremes though, with those who complain about certain social themes being inserted into a work and appealing to a certain base, and those who feel there aren't enough of those social messages present. I realize this is a touchy subject, but I do think it's important to talk about. One major topic that has become the center of much film discussion is that of diversity. In years past, La La Land might have been seen as just a charming old-school Hollywood musical. However, when it was released, what fueled a lot of the discussion was the criticism that it was taking an African-American art form like jazz and appropriating it toward its two white main characters. I think there's definitely a worthy discussion to be had there, although I did disagree with the analysis that John Legend's character Keith was the central antagonist. I found him to be the voice of reason, explaining to Ryan Gosling's Sebastian that he needs to stop being so stuck up and traditionalist, and that the way to help jazz is to evolve it. And Keith is correct, but he's not the focus of the film. Sebastian and Mia are, as La La Land is essentially a two-hander romance. With that said, while I love the movie, I think Ruby Lot Lavinia's review for Wired was a well-written article that properly explained why the racial aspects of the film rubbed some people the wrong way. I myself think diversity is a good thing. We need a variety of stories about different races, told from different points of view. Part of the reason Black Panther worked was not just because it was a fun superhero movie, but also because director Ryan Coogler used the popular superhero and the setting of Wakanda to tackle larger themes relevant to the present day. Black Panther was a celebration of African culture I don't recall seeing on this largest scale before, and that's wonderful. Through the main antagonist, Eric Killmonger, Coogler had the character express genuine points of frustration at Wakanda for not helping African Americans while they were enslaved and segregated, even though they had the resources. Could a white director making Black Panther have resulted in the same film? I don't think so. That movie needed a black perspective in order to properly tackle those themes. Now, one term often used by detractors that I don't quite understand is forced diversity. The world is one filled with many races, religions, cultures, and people in general. You walk outside, or ride the bus or subway, or go to the mall, and you'll see a wide variety of people. So when a movie or television show features characters of different races, it's primarily a reflection of the world we live in, and whatever setting it takes place in. Some people especially seem to make a fuss when a character's race is changed. Remember the commotion over Annie being portrayed by an African-American actress? The character may have been white in the original comic strips and Broadway production, but that was not an essential part of the character, nor did it define her. The intent of the musical, to depict orphans disenfranchised and forgotten by society, remained intact in the 2014 film adaptation, and that matters more than the color of her skin. Although, with Quvenzhané Wallis taking on the role, young black girls can now see themselves as Annie. Anyway, remember when people made a big deal about the recent Ghostbusters movie, and how the casting of women tore the internet apart? You were either for it or against it, and people were angry for some reason, and in retrospect, that was really absurd, because it was a silly comedy about catching ghosts. That's all it was, and at the end of the day, you either thought it was funny, or you didn't. And with the announcement of a new Ghostbusters movie opening next year, it's going to start up all over again, and I'm withdrawing myself from those discussions. Speaking of nostalgic fanboy properties, Star Wars. Even the prequels, as divisive as they were, did not inspire the kind of intense reaction The Last Jedi got. I did a defense of The Last Jedi last year, and like I said in that video, if you did not like the movie, then that's perfectly alright. What I do find interesting are the number of accusations that the franchise has become too political now, and that it forces its ideologies down the audience's throat. If you thought The Last Jedi was unsubtle in its themes, that's an acceptable criticism. But I find that saying Star Wars is suddenly political is rather strange, as the movies have always been political. This is a series where the heroes are called rebels and the villains are the Empire. George Lucas has frequently stated that the original trilogy was meant as an allegory for the Vietnam War, which he made especially obvious in Return of the Jedi, where the more technologically advanced Empire is unexpectedly defeated by the Ewoks, who they completely underestimate. Lucas has also said he based the Emperor on Richard Nixon. Lucas also borrowed a lot from World War II, and again, he's not subtle about this either. The Empire's soldiers are called stormtroopers, and a number of shots are copied directly from Triumph of the Will. Meanwhile, Emperor Palpatine's rise to power in the prequels is similar to how Adolf Hitler gained power in Germany. Again, George Lucas has himself said this was intentional. J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson are merely following in his footsteps in their depiction of the First Order and the Resistance. One derogatory term I see thrown around a lot these days is social justice warrior, and I understand what that's supposed to imply, but when I hear that term, I just think of Robin Hood. I especially find it interesting when I hear the new Star Wars films referred to as SJW propaganda. I mean, what did you think the rebels were doing in the original trilogy? They were not exactly flying X-Wings and trying to destroy the Death Star just because they felt like it. You also see complaints of superheroes becoming social justice warriors. Again, isn't that the whole idea behind them? Captain America was literally created to fight the Nazis. Superman has been portrayed as an immigrant who wants to do his part to fight for truth, justice, and the American way since his inception, and that's continued on into the films he's appeared in. I think part of the larger appeal of superhero movies has to do with these characters in tights and capes reflecting aspects of society, whether it's the distrust of government surveillance in Captain America the Winter Soldier, the destructive nature of war in Wonder Woman, or how the other has to fight for equal rights like in Incredibles 2. I've mostly talked about one extreme, those who complain about films becoming too political, but there are also those who think filmmakers and studios don't do enough. I do side with those who think studios need to work harder, hire more women directors, and thankfully the success of films like Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman has led to more hires on major projects, like Kathy Yan on Birds of Prey and Mariel Heller on the Mr. Rogers film A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. The percentage of women directors in Hollywood is still far too low, though. However, you also have incidents like when the Coen brothers got flack a few years ago for their films lacking people of color in lead roles, to which they responded that they don't write their scripts with a checklist in mind. It's entirely possible they did consider making a film centered on a person of color, but might have felt they were the wrong voice to tell that story. They are two white guys from Minnesota, after all. Just look at the current valid criticisms being leveled at Peter Farrelly's Green Book, for what many find to be a troubling depiction of 1960s racism in the South. I thought the movie was fine, but it is rather simplistic in how it tackles its themes, and I imagine an African-American director would have taken a different approach to the material. Of course, this is not limited to white directors. Spike Lee has gotten criticism for not being harsher in his depiction of policemen in BlacKkKlansman. This is a time when filmmakers have to be more careful than ever about how they voice their opinions on a sensitive subject. Brad Bird was heavily criticized just for explaining why Frozone's wife is not seen on screen in the Incredibles movies. Steven Spielberg and Tony Kirshner, who are currently developing a new film adaptation of West Side Story, flew to Puerto Rico to get actual input on what they can do to avoid the mistakes from the Broadway musical and 1961 film adaptation. From what I saw, they were very respectful and willing to learn what not to do, but many are still skeptical. To conclude, I do think Hollywood has a long way to go before there's proper representation on screen and behind the scenes. I want to see more movies made by and about African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Indigenous people, the LGBTQ community, and other groups underrepresented in the film industry. And I also think we need to stop being so angry all the time. So many movies are hit with some sort of controversy these days, big or small. I do think people should speak up and let their opinions be heard, but it also seems like people get so up in arms about everything. Again, remember Ghostbusters? This isn't even limited to movies. The character designs in the new She-Ra and the Princesses of Power animated series got heat because they were not supermodels like in the Filmation show. The character designs! The show wasn't even out yet. Anyway, this might be the toughest subject I've ever tackled on a video, but I genuinely want to know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think I'm wrong? Let me know. This is just one opinion after all, and I'm sure yours is absolutely valid. Just please be civil and respectful. That's all I ask. See you next time.